Thank you, Vernon. Actually, it's because of Anne's friendship. My thanks to all of you for the invitation to be with you today. First, I want to acknowledge members of the Washington area Brown University family who joined us today. Thank you so much for coming. And of course, my fellow university presidents, who are such an impressive group. I especially admire, as I said to him earlier, President Moat, who is wearing a terrapin on his lapel, and I'm going to ask you for that later, because when I first visited the Maryland campus and I saw the banners on the campus announcing the mascots, which are ferocious turtles, I thought there was such promise in that. And it has served as an inspiration to me for a long time. So hello to all my fellow presidents. I also want to acknowledge a member of the Rhode Island delegation who is present. We are so fortunate to have outstanding representation here in Washington, and we're grateful for the leadership of public servants such as Senators Jack Reed and Sheldon Whitehouse, as well as our two congressional representatives, Patrick Kennedy and Jim Langevin. Now, this is very important to say because, contrary to our good fortune with respect to the positive relations with our delegation from Rhode Island, these are quite difficult times in the relationship between government and higher education. The degree to which U.S. higher education has fueled upward social mobility and economic growth in the United States is the result really of a sustained period of positive coordination between these two sectors. But this is from all appearances under stress today, bringing with it the specter of the diminishing preeminence of U.S. higher education, just as major improvements and paradigm shifts in once lagging higher education markets elsewhere in the world point to an increasing advantage for those competing economies. Brown's Horace Mann, an 1819 graduate of the university, led an early effort to make education broadly available to citizens through public education. We are also indebted to Horace Mann for urging the elimination of flogging, by the way. The pursuit of access to education for all social classes was crucial, really, in setting this country on the path to becoming one of the most dynamic and open societies in the world. Recognizing that impact, legislators rightly point to the urgency of making college available and affordable for a broader and more diverse segment of the population. Now, this goal is to be applauded, it is to be implemented. However, there are certain dimensions, I think, of the recent push for specific funding mechanisms to make this possible that could pose very serious risks to some of the greatest achievements and future promise of U.S. higher education. Every year, world prizes such as the Nobels acknowledge preeminent scientific, economic, and medical discoveries. While the most recent year wasn't, frankly, the best year for U.S. winners, one has only to look back to 2006 to see the stunning success of U.S. scientists in winning these prizes. Aside from those in literature and peace, which we should have won also, all Nobel Prize winners that year were U.S.-based. Now, that is remarkable. But what is really remarkable is the educational legacy the winners share. They belong to a community of scholars produced by leading colleges and universities. The names of these institutions won't surprise you, and don't cheer if I name your university. In chemistry, Roger Kornberg was educated at Stanford. The physics winners, John Mathis and George Smoot, were educated at Berkeley and MIT, respectively. The winners in physiology and medicine, Andrew Fire and Craig Mello, went to Berkeley and Harvard. Mello, after completing his undergraduate work at Brown. The sole economics winner, Phelps, studied at Yale. Today, these scholars are at Stanford, Berkeley, the University of Massachusetts, and Columbia, and one is at NASA. These scientists come from a period in higher education when universities were able to pursue leads in science and technology with the strong support not only of industry and federal funding, but also that of great research universities whose growth and extraordinary assets enabled and protected their promising research. Who would have predicted a century ago the environmental degradation that has led to climate change? Yet science in every era, university science, stands ready to identify such problems, raise awareness, change behavior, and bring solutions to bear. This is the miracle of what the modern university and its research capacity offers the world. What an evolution from the narrow missions of colonial universities. Even the report of the Spellings Commission acknowledges, quote, "It is no exaggeration to declare that higher education has become one of our greatest success stories." So if there is agreement, even among critics, that this sector, encompassing almost 4,000 institutions, has been the best in the world, what's driving the current concerns about higher education? And how can we address what is at the root of that concern without undermining the thriving organism that is our system of higher education? This year, the House approved, by a vote of 354 to 58, a higher education reauthorization bill, along with 27 amendments for debate. The latter included a provision that would have required universities to submit an annual report to the Secretary of Education on their endowment expenditures for, quote, "reducing the cost of the programs of instruction," and a number of other measures that would increase regulations and reporting, thus diverting university resources away from instruction and research. The tuition and fee benchmarking amendment would single out institutions with the largest increase in their tuition and fees for annual benchmarks without the necessary consideration of the value that can be added for students based on additional revenue. Pressure on universities to address these concerns could lead to decisions driven not by mission, not by need, not by the push for excellence, but by the requirements of outside agencies insisting on actions that have no basis in or concern for excellence, however that's defined by that particular institution and the population it serves. As the Higher Education Act works its way through conference committee, I hope that some of the potentially harmful provisions can be changed before the final bill passes later this spring. Now, to be sure, independent institutions should not be immune from criticism, from adherence to the laws of the land, and from working with policymakers to improve the effectiveness of their service to society. In higher education, we should welcome the interest and involvement of policymakers in pointing to ways in which we can improve our institutions. Secretary Spellings, again, in her essay in Politico, noted that we are an industry, quote, "entrenched, insular, clubby, and wish to be accountable to no one but ourselves." She's only partly right. Clubby, maybe. Arrogant and elitist, perhaps too much of the time. But entrenched, insular, and accountable to no one, no way. Universities and colleges freely share information with others, even the type that businesses would consider proprietary information, for the good of advancing knowledge. I was just talking to someone about the MIT material that's been put online. I went to a meeting at Davos this year with presidents from around the world. I was delighted to learn that some of them in India in particular, have abandoned, these are the institutes of technology in India, some of them have abandoned altogether the teaching of introductory physics. You know why? Because of the MIT course. Extraordinary. We collaborate freely across institutions, sharing information about advances in knowledge to even our competitors. What corporation would do that? What government? One reason for the claim of insularity is the criticism of the accrediting process of our universities. Well, as president of the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, past chair of accrediting teams, and president of a university that relies on the accrediting process, I can tell you that these reviews are not necessarily as represented. Much of the criticism that we hear from policymakers relies too often on accrediting failures, while largely ignoring the extraordinarily diligent work of thousands of independent-minded educators who, uncompensated, assess their peers and competitors with great independence and integrity. That accreditation can be improved is doubtless true, but the sector is not, from my experience, a vast, self-serving activity providing fake assessments to colleges and universities. Some of the interventions being proposed to address the perceived insularity of higher education would ostensibly institute uniform assessment models and testing approaches for a system that is far from uniform in its missions, its character, and its promise. The current landscape of higher education resulted from a loose network of different types of institutions that grew out of disparate goals and needs. Miraculously, perhaps because they serve specific and fundamental needs and because they were allowed to develop based on those needs and not in response to a central bureaucratic design, they flourished and produced a brilliant framework for the growth and development of this country. The federalization of all of higher education is an idea whose time has not come. Let's look at some of the reasons. Most importantly, the diversity of these institutions is their strength. And in that strength, I think, is the future of the nation. This diversity derives not merely from the fact that these universities are of many types and have many different missions, but also from the fact that they are generally independent of each other. Learning is, after all, our business. And by learning from each other and adapting to what we learn, we become stronger. In that sense, our differences strengthen rather than weaken us. Let me just say that countries that centrally mandate all curricula and outcomes tend to complain today about the seemingly limited ability of faculty and students to create, criticize, and innovate. They often find broad-based, energetic discovery and breakthroughs wanting in their system. In more centrally controlled mechanistic practices is the risk of rote intake, narrow testing, disinterested learners, lackluster scholarship, constrained intellectual curiosity, and limited innovation. What a risk that is compared with the purported ills of higher education today. Our differences are our strength, I say. We have technical colleges and liberal arts colleges, online colleges and residential colleges, 2-year and 4-year colleges, local or regional colleges, and national colleges. These institutions make for an extraordinary range of access points to education. They provide access not merely with the help of government funding, but also with the commitment of untold millions of individuals who have built these universities because of their conviction that supporting education is a way to support their country. When policymakers talk about efficiency and cost controls, let it be known that had institutions grown with just these goals as priorities in the narrow context that many proponents intend, they would have avoided many of the features that have made U.S. higher education so valuable, in fact, in the world today. We would not have focused on great libraries, advanced technologies, and exceptional laboratories. We would not have focused on mature learners, nor on those with remedial needs, nor certainly not on the underprivileged. We would not have focused on advancing knowledge, nor on supporting research. We would not have focused on serving the nation by offering programs in art, languages, public policy, or education. And we most certainly would not have focused on the brave and brilliant work that exposed governments and challenged injustice. Imagine the great Francis Wayland, president of Brown from 1827 to 1855, challenging the morality of slavery in the face of a public at the time fully willing to see this heinous practice serve the economic needs of the states. The fact that he and his university were independent and driven by other than cost factors made all the difference. Institutional efficiency and productivity is an excellent goal when it allows us all to offer lower prices and provide wider access. It is not when it gives government a toehold into restricting the ability of colleges and universities to set high educational goals, to carve out new knowledge, and to challenge injustice. To seek a uniform model for an extraordinarily diverse educational system that is designed for many different purposes may not be the best route to improving higher education. And not all institutions have the intention of creating Nobel-level work, and not all should. Some, seeking primarily to teach well and prepare students for careers, can have a lower cost profile. Others may be at the opposite end of the spectrum, providing a range of highly advanced programs. I doubt very seriously that MIT would have had the ability to mount this ambitious worldwide program to offer its courses online to everybody across the world if they had been constrained in the way that some of the legislation would suggest. There is room in higher education for lower cost instruction and lower cost delivery, but there should also be room for universities that serve a more costly purpose. Costs should vary, in fact, widely if we are to offer the varied access points that we've come to enjoy. Now, the seeming target of public policymakers is a small subset of mostly private institutions in the country, those with endowments of over 500 million, which, by the way, is an arbitrary dividing line since there's enormous variability in expenditures among this group, depending on the scope of the institution's mission. The fact is that only 9% of undergraduates attend colleges charging more than $30,000. It's important to note that most of these students choose these colleges. Why? Precisely because of their significantly higher investments in technology, research faculty, small class instruction, and advanced research, which is largely what makes them cost as much as they do. Institutions that have a legitimate reason for more significant investments in instruction, advanced training, and research should have the leeway to preserve their mission through the most effective management of their resources, up to and including setting tuition at an appropriate level and allocating their endowment revenues in keeping with their purpose. Intervention by government to change those allocations might have the unintended consequence of eliminating some of the best features of American higher education. Skipping many pages. Imposing spending and price restraints on all of U.S. higher education may drive this sector away from excellence, consolidating it toward median-level quality, and assuring the rise of university systems elsewhere that would happily assume the mantle of the best university system in the world. In fact, I would say this is exactly what is driving lots of the activity in the European Union, in China, and in India, and make no mistake about it, their intention is to create the best institutions in the world. And how are they trying to do it? To some degree by imitating the U.S. system of higher education. Let's not forget that one factor in the strength of this sector is the competition that institutions enjoy with each other, and I don't mean on the athletic field. And I'm always aware of the fact that when I say competition on the athletic field, people are skeptical about our competition in the Ivy League. But you shouldn't be. We are a powerhouse conference, absolutely. In addition, we all compete for students, faculty, government grants, awards and prizes, philanthropic support, and rankings. Those institutions that compete most successfully attract good students, good resources, and in doing so, they continue to improve, extending their success in more and more powerful ways. Those institutions that are weaker may fall back and even go out of business. Economists tell us that competition is good, and that under most circumstances, it leads to improvement. Our competition relies on our differences, the advantages that we can establish, the niche that are uniquely ours. Regulations that reduce the differences that are the basis for that healthy competition may lead to uniformity without excellence and without any incentive to improve. Efforts by Congress to address high tuition and too rapidly escalating student costs of education no doubt have as their intent a very sensible concern: to make education affordable to the largest possible number of students. There is no educator worth his or her salt who would disagree with the importance and urgency of such a goal. The more students we educate, the more we succeed as a society. And by the way, that truth extends across all types of institutions. The data show that no matter what type of college one attends, the chances of an improved life and greater earning capacity increase, no matter what kind of institution. However, the quest for enhanced access fails miserably as an argument for uniformity across institutions. That uniformity would destroy the very assets that bring students to colleges, their particular approaches to education. I personally found my way, as you heard, to a small, unheard of black college in New Orleans that the drive to uniformity would have eliminated scores of years ago. I was just back on that devastated campus 2 weeks ago with some of my Brown students. Today, Dillard is bravely striving to overcome the wreckage of Hurricane Katrina. And not even this ferocious storm could wash away the past achievements and future promise of its 1.5 century existence. The striving of that small black institution and others like it saved this nation from its intolerable tolerance of segregation and racial discrimination, giving rise to a generations really, of empowered leaders. Brown University, like so many others with endowments over $500 million, recently received a letter from the Senate Finance Committee requesting information about our endowment payout. The goal of this letter was presumed to be that of applying pressure on us to take our endowment gains and apply them to reducing tuition and increasing financial aid. For decades, such funds have been used in just that way, to increase financial aid, support the highest quality instruction, underwrite advances in science and technology, and myriad other useful purposes that do, in fact, help society. As we all know, the cost of discovery is very high. Ask any research division of a U.S. corporation. Ask them, too, how they'd compare their in-house proprietary research operation to the research engines at universities. Which do you think are more cost-effective? The one serves the interests of shareholders, the other serves the interests of the entire world. The one is directed at marketplace demand, the other seeks to answer questions and enlarge the body of knowledge. Removing from certain research universities the flexibility to support this costly endeavor when they can raise funds to do so would undermine the long-term public interest. I continue to believe that the real value of American higher education is the unique way in which the network of higher education institutions allows every student to understand that they can aspire to a higher level of achievement across the spectrum of U.S. universities and colleges. The knowledge of that fact allowed me to study at a small, low-cost college with limited breadth, satisfied that I would be able to move on to a larger university in time. And when people ask me why it was that I was able to do well at Harvard, I like to remind them that it was not in spite of my Dillard education, but because of it. The point is that no one is required to attend a costly college to get a good education. Students can thrive at many different types of institutions. Now, I don't argue for recklessly higher costs, waste, lack of accountability, or heaven forbid, limited access to universities. I do not argue that we are immune from reasonable governmental oversight and regulation. I think there are some features of the Spellings report that remind us of ways we can improve on what we're doing. First, this process tells us that, as Lamar Alexander has observed, we need to be better at speaking in plain English about what the Academy is up to. Even more to the point, I think we need to practice more listening. Secondly, transparency is very important. Why should we fear making information available? We need to find new ways of not simply providing good information about costs and expenditures, but also letting the public see how our internal process of priority setting is often as good as or better than those of most institutions. I think transparency extends to making available reports on outcomes from our universities and colleges. I don't see any reason that our accreditation reports shouldn't be available to the public, provided that the prospect of making them public does not alter the candor, rigor, and value of this process of assessment. However, the creation of such a robust culture of accountability and transparency should not include the kinds of regulations, systems, and strategies that transform this system into a shadow of its current success, wherein innovation is encouraged, unique approaches are permitted, and discovery is driven to its highest potential. Peter Heather, writing about the fall of the Roman Empire, you really want to make a point, you have to talk about the fall of the Roman Empire. So get ready, I'm about to do that. Peter noted that the conclusion that the confiscation of local endowments in the 3rd century caused a major shift in local political power away from town councils to imperial bureaucrats. This did away with the whole point of the local displays of generosity recorded in early imperial transcriptions. One hopes that, chastened by the efforts of some to redirect their good intentions, donors do not conclude that supporting education no longer offers the promise of helping the world. When the Romans confiscated these local endowments, it led to a drying up of important civic intentions and the building of more self-interested bureaucracies. Let us not make the same mistake in this country. Instead, let's hope that we in universities are open to correcting any deficiencies in our practices such that we can retain the confidence of policymakers and preserve the diversity, breadth, and independence of higher education. Because I think that the strength of our universities is in our ability to continue to set priorities and make investments in excellence at the forefront of knowledge. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for bearing with me, and I'd be happy to take questions.
No questions about the fall of the Roman Empire? Right here.
Microphone. Yep. I once sat at one of these luncheons between 2 college presidents, and most of the conversation was what I would call about expletive deleted tenure. There's less job security in this world. How does tenure fit into making higher education better?
Well, this is a very popular question for consideration, but I'll just tell you what I think from my own experience. I love the fact that our university independence is really won by having a critical mass of individuals whose jobs are not threatened because they work in areas of controversy, because they say, for example, that life came into being a certain way that does not comport with popular view, that they're able to teach their students without being forced to teach them something specific in accordance with what society thinks at the time. I think the answer vis-a-vis Francis Whalen is a very telling one. How did abolition, particularly earlier in Great Britain, come into being? Two students at St. John's College at Cambridge were persuaded that it was evil. That happened all over the world. What serves the public interest at the time is not always what's wise. It's not always what's moral. Having a protected group able to advance knowledge and question what's taking place is frankly invaluable to us. And it is a small cost to us to provide tenure compared with the great benefit that we get from it, in my view. So I think it really is a critical factor in being able to do this cutting-edge research. You know, I have to say, as a university president, that it's not the favorite part of my job that faculty stand up to me. That's not the best thing in the world, but nevertheless, they can do that. And because they can do that, universities are stronger. Universities are better. I believe that you will not find this taking place in places where there is not tenure. I've been in systems where tenure is rarely granted and where faculty are subjected to pressure and threat and so forth. I've been there. It doesn't work. You can almost see the correlation between quality of scholarship and teaching in those instances where one is present and the other is not. So I believe very strongly in tenure, I have to say, and I think one of the things universities have to do is resist mightily the effort to eliminate tenure. Now, whether every faculty member needs to be tenured, I think the mix is extremely important, and universities have already moved in the direction of teasing out those areas that require tenure and those areas that do not require tenure. So I think going forward, it will be a more complex picture than it perhaps is thought to be by the public.
Hi. My name is Susan Johnson. I head Commonwealth Academy. We are a school, college preparatory school for students with learning disabilities and ADHD. Jonathan K. Mooney was a graduate of Brown, a dyslexic and with ADHD, who came to speak to our students, and certainly he credits being at Brown with his success, and I personally want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
My question is, we have, as a group, or as a school, we have a 70% male to 30% female distribution. The current enrollment statistics for colleges, however, is shifting more toward females. Mm-hmm. I don't know the reason for, I don't know how those two facts correlate, but it's interesting to get your opinion as to how you see that affecting how colleges approach students, how they approach admissions, and what outcome do you think that may have economically?
You mean the gender balance?
The gender balance, okay, or imbalance right now is what is being touted, is that it's a 60-40 male-female, female to male.
It is, and first let me say that I believe that every young person should have the opportunity to get a first-rate education that is fit for what they need. That's very important. It makes absolutely no difference to me what the balance is. Students should apply, they should get in, and we should get over being concerned about how many women are in the seats versus how many men. Now, this is coming from somebody who was president of Women's College. Don't forget that. Now, having said that, I do think something is happening in the country with respect to boys. And I think it is a great concern. And that is the ways in which boys are socialized that may tend to send them to categorize them, let's say. One should be concerned about the number of boys consigned to special education because of so-called behavioral problems. One should be concerned about the ease with which we categorize people who, young people who are, who have certain difficulties because it stigmatizes them, and it also provides a kind of animosity, in a sense, toward learning that is really unjustified. We have to meet students where they are, every student. And I think that we have to be careful in going back into K through 12 and looking at what's happening with boys, because pretty soon, if we don't do that, we really will have an educated class that is female, and that would not, it seems to me, be desirable, because there will be so much potential lost for boys who are stopping out of school at a much earlier age. So I don't deny that. I think that is a problem, that we should be doing something about it, but that has to take place with parents. It has to take place in the early grades, because it actually starts to happen very early. And there is a link also in the African American community, a very strong link between the so-called criminalization of young males and their incarceration that we simply have not dealt with as a nation. I'm very happy to say that we have a faculty member, Glenn Lowry, whose research is on this question, and that's one of the most urgent problems I think we face in this country, is to figure out how to get ourselves out of that mess, because it is a mess and it's going to reap terrible things for the country if we don't solve it. But I agree with you. I think that is something that is a priority that we need to address.
Charlene?
Thank you. I'm Charlene DuJarvis, the president of Southeastern University. First of all, Dr. Simmons, thank you for your passion about higher education. There's going to be a demographic shift in higher education, as you know. The Chronicle just carried another article about it, that there will be fewer whites and fewer blacks in institutions of higher education. There will be more Asians and more Hispanics, and there will be more students who are of low income and ill-prepared for college. So the question is, what should the country be doing about that, and what should universities be doing about that to prepare for this shift in demographics? And what should those of us who are representing some of those students now be looking forward to?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking that. And first of all, you cannot teach well if you do not respect the people you're teaching. The most important thing that we can do as educators is to abandon the notion that there are only certain people who can perform at a high level in an intellectual context. And that's been our history, the assumption that intellect is the province of a narrow band of individuals. That's number one. Number two, we must not dismiss people on the basis of where they are in their education. Now, let me say, this is one of the passages I had to delete because it was too long, but let me say, one of the greatest things about our educational system in this country is that you can wake up at 30 years old and discover that you're excited about learning, and then you can start your education at that point. That is rarely true in the rest of the world. There is a window in most countries. If you miss that window, you're basically out of it and you never get to be college educated. There are people still today at 60 going to college because our society accepts that. That's a tremendous benefit to the economy, by the way, the fact that people not only go to college the first time, but they keep going back for more education. So the first thing we've got to do is not categorize people as being able at a certain age And therefore, if they don't make the cut at that age, they have to go someplace else and do something different. Because I think there are different learning patterns that will emerge from this. We have a good deal of rhetoric around the fact that there are dropouts, particularly in the Hispanic community, and what that's going to do. Yes, that's true. We should focus less on the fact that there are dropouts and more on the fact that we have to encourage people to pursue education whenever they're able to do it. So if they do it at 20, it's okay. If they do it at 24, it's okay. I love the story of a friend of mine who dropped out of school. And she decided, well, she would go to get a GED. So she got a GED. Then she managed to go to a community college to get started. She did that. Then she transferred into University of North Carolina. She did that. And then she went to graduate school. And she ended up a professor at Princeton University. Now, people think of that as, what a novel thing, but it's not. It's not a novel thing. It's not a novel thing for me to come from a country school, go to high school in Texas in a segregated environment, and then go on to a black college, and then to go to Harvard. People think of that as unusual. It isn't. It isn't that unusual. So our way of thinking about education really needs to change. We have to make education available. We have to make it open and continue to be open especially for people who approach it from at different points in their life. That, I think, is going to be absolutely essential if we're going to be able to sustain the educated workforce that we have today, because there are going to be many, many different patterns that we see in the future. And we've got to have a system that can accommodate many different patterns. I guess if you didn't get this from my talk, the most important thing to me is that we understand that there are many different kinds of institutions. Community colleges. I work with community colleges because I think they're fantastic. They provide enormous opportunity in our country. And in my inaugural address at Brown, I said something that I think was terrifying to people, which I try to do at least once in every speech. And what I said was that Ivy League universities ought to preserve places for students from community colleges. And the reason that we should is because there is a continuum of education. And the most forceful statement we can make to the country and to young people is that they can get a GED, and they can go to community college, and then they can end up at the University of Maryland, or at George Washington, or at American. That is a powerful thing. And we need to embrace that instead of thinking of ourselves as being these privileged areas of education that only admit the select few who come from particular kinds of institutions. The system will be much more robust, much more credible, by the way, to policymakers if we work hard to make sure that people understand that that's the system we have. Right now, I don't think people understand that is the system we have.
Last question. Okay.
Well, the leading institutions in the country are engaged in what you might describe as a arms race in regards to financial aid, with a few schools having a tremendous competitive advantage. I wonder if you might talk about what the implications of that are and how you think it might evolve.
Well, I was actually trying to speak to some of the implications, and that is that race will end up meaning that many institutions spend money on financial aid instead of spending money on instruction, on research, and on some of the other important programs that they would like to do. That's number one. Number two, I think we got into the arms race because many of us didn't see the problem coming. I remember going to we're not supposed to talk about what we discuss at the Ivy League president's meeting, so don't tell anybody I said this. But I remember going naively when I first became a president of Brown, to my colleagues in the Ivy League and saying, you know, I think it would be very important for us to reach out to certain kinds of students and to really demonstrate how involved the Ivy League is in this notion of an educated citizenry. But those kinds of things really didn't go very far. I think we're being, what is happening now is a direct result of the fact that we did not see ourselves as part of that continuum. This really is a kind of punishment, I think, for wealthy institutions, which are, by the way, very few in number. It's a punishment for wealthy institutions because they really didn't pay attention to how far away from that educational continuum they were moving. So I think it's an opportunity for us to do some things that perhaps we would have been better off doing some decades ago. So what do I mean by that? I remember talking to the chairman of the corporation at Harvard at one point, and he was they were going around asking questions about, well, is there anything Harvard should be doing? I remember saying at the time, yes, take the money that you're amassing and spend it on something that's useful for society. So here's an example. Go and say to outstanding young people, if you will go into education, you can come to Harvard free of charge, and you can go and get a degree, and you can go and teach in public schools. Amazing what that would have done. So I think we have not been good enough at identifying the kinds of things we can do. That's one thing. In terms of reducing financial aid, I actually think that's a very positive thing. Reducing loans, I think that's a very positive thing. Loans had gotten out of hand. Tuition is growing too rapidly. I think this is a wake-up call for us to address those very real questions, which is we can't expect people to come to college and to walk away with loans of $100,000. It's not reasonable. It doesn't meet the reasonableness test. Is it reasonable for students to borrow to go to college? Absolutely. It's absurd to say that a student can happily go off and borrow money to purchase a car or purchase clothing or to do all kinds of things and not use those resources to go to college. What we're creating, my big concern is we're creating now an expectation that people will no longer have to pay for college. I think something will be lost if that happens. But I think most universities certainly won't be able to offer these kinds of rich packages. Some will no doubt go out of business because they are on the margin perhaps already, and people will increasingly not be willing to pay tuition at the cost of tuition, and therefore some places won't survive. I think this is going to be a cataclysmic change in higher education myself. I think I've seen nothing like it, certainly in my time in higher education, and it's going to force a lot of change. What I've tried to suggest is not all of that change will be good. We have to be very watchful, very attentive, because this could dismantle what has been the best educational system, higher educational system in the world. So I'm asking policymakers to pay attention, because there are some possibly inadvertent consequences to doing the things that we're currently doing. Thank you very much.
Ruth, we are the Economic Club of Washington, but we don't have any money. But we do have a token of our appreciation and thanks to you, and we can send it to you or you can tote it back, either way. But thank you so much for being here, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.